the Classic City Sports Podcast.
And McAllister down the left field line. Connor Tate is going to round third. He will score. And rounding third is Blaylock. He will score. And the Dogs walk it off.
If you're looking for the latest Georgia Bulldog news in football, basketball, baseball, and recruiting, then you are in the right place.
It's third down, Bryce Young's career. You need 10, play clock at 4. From the pocket, launching downfield, underthrown and intercepted. Keely Ringo has an escort down the sidelines. All the way to the end zone, and Georgia is going to conquer the Crimson Tide.
Hosted by Jeremiah Stoddard and Jonathan Williams.
Georgia on the mountaintop. Demons be gone, and the drought is over. National champions at long last.
Just sit back, relax, and prepare yourself for these hot takes you're about to listen to.
All right, welcome back to another episode of the Classic City Sports Podcast. As always, Jeremiah Stoddard, Jonathan Williams. Sorry for the delay to get started. It's been a while since we've done this, out of practice as far as getting some stuff set up. Realized my lighting is not going to be so good tonight because I do not have an adapter that I apparently let somebody else use. So I was looking for that for a second, realized don't have it. So we're going live here, and I'm pretty sure I went live for a few seconds before I actually started the intro. So we're a little rusty if you can't tell. But Jonathan, it's great to be back on the show with you. We got a lot of stuff to talk about tonight. Obviously, we've got the NFL draft that just came to a close. The NCAA transfer portal is now closed as well. And I heard you and Christian talking on y'all's show last night about some of the stuff going on with the NCAA, the profit sharing stuff that's coming out. And I wanted to add to your conversation on that as well. So we've got a lot of stuff to talk about tonight. I'm excited about it. How are you feeling?
I'm doing great. It's kind of a shame though that you say that like transfer portal's over and the NFL draft is over, because now this is, dead period of all dead periods during the off season. This is where there is no action really going on outside of some maybe occasional breaking news, or especially the NCAA, like you're mentioning, is a big topic right now. But these next few months are a lull. It's kind of where it starts to drag a little bit, and where we kind of get that itch back for college football, and we start praying for it to come back. But doing good outside of that.
Yeah, we are into the dead period of college football. I know we haven't done a show in a little while. There's been a lot of scheduling issues and other things going on with us. And I would love to sit here and tell you that we were going to be back every single week moving forward, but that's probably not going to happen, as I've got traveling and other things coming up in the next couple months as well. As Jonathan is going to be getting married here in about 1 month. And so he will obviously be busy right before and right after that for obvious reasons as well. So a lot of stuff going on, but we did want to give you an episode as we have a lot of stuff to talk about. So let's start with the transfer portal information stuff first, because that was, going on a little bit before the draft, and then it just came to a close, and then we'll go to the draft afterwards. As of the Georgia players that decided to leave, was there any that stood out to you or kind of shocked you at all, or anything that kind of like was surprising? I know there was a lot of stuff that we kind of expected in a way, but just curious if there was anything that surprised you.
Not really. It was pretty quiet. It's been really quiet across all of college football. I know that there was some talk about, this is going to be the craziest transfer portal season ever. This year's spring transfer portal window is actually going to break the internet, like all this stuff, as my Siri right now is trying to activate. Don't know what's going on there. Anyways. And then it was like radio silent, not really any big names going on. And that was kind of the case for Georgia. Like Braxton Hicks, he entered the transfer portal, which, not one that you kind of expect, but it's one that you're just like, okay, it makes sense. Andrew Paul, I think, kind of caught some people off guard, but right after G-Day was over, I went there and covered it, and I was talking to somebody after the game, and I was like, one of those running backs is going to enter the portal, and it's probably going to end up being Andrew Paul, because he just feels like the odd man out. And he looked great during G-Day, but it seems like nowadays you just always have one of those players that they're going to show out, they're going to have a really good game, and then the very next day or a couple days after, they're going to be in the portal. That's exactly what happened with him. But good on him for being able to seek some more opportunity. I don't know that he's committed yet, though. I'm not sure that he's actually
Yeah, I don't
found
think he
himself a
has.
home.
Yeah.
So yeah, still kind of searching for that one. Then the biggest one that ended up happening was Christian Miller. But then, of course, less than 24 hours later, he sends out a tweet that he's going to stay at Georgia. So some interesting things going on there. Some people say he was bag chasing. Some people said maybe it was just a premature decision and he changed his mind. Who knows what was going on there? But he's staying at Georgia. So outside of that, I mean, it was just kind of business as usual, you know?
Yeah, I think the one that almost surprised me overall was Andrew Paul. Not that it actually surprised me, but that it was like that feels like a big name to me because I've been watching him, from when he first got to campus and all the stuff he was doing. And then he had injury issues and things like that. And so he was trying to come back from it. But that running back room, especially once you went out and got ETN, it became like you don't have enough room, and he's now far on the depth chart to where it's going to take a lot for him to get to that top. Not that he's not a good player, but he's going to have a hard process as far as being able to get on the field at Georgia versus he could go somewhere else and actually earn some starting time very early in his career as well. I was going to talk about the Christian Miller stuff as well, so I'm glad you brought that up. I think that was one of those situations like one of two things happened, right? Like you said, maybe it was premature. Maybe it was bag chasing, that kind of thing. Maybe it was like he didn't feel, that he knew exactly what was coming up for him in this next year. So he was like, all right, I'm going to leave. Maybe it was a bargaining chip on his side with UGA of being like, all right, where am I at? Where am I sitting on the depth chart? What am I doing on this aspect? I know that part of his issue probably was the depth chart. That is a crowded room overall. There's a lot of names. There's a lot of guys that are going to be competing at his position. So maybe it was something like that of like, I need to know where I stand. And I'm trying to get some attention on that part. Not that he's looking for public attention, but maybe it's internal attention that he wanted. Or maybe it was about looking for a bag and he went out and then he came, but Georgia was like, all right, we'll give you a little bit. You can stay. That's the way of the world of the NIL stuff right now. It's kind of crazy. It's kind of the Wild West on that part, but I do feel like maybe it had more to do with, where he is in the depth chart, what he's trying to do, where he stands, and trying to really figure out that aspect of it.
I mean, I think too, what people kind of don't realize maybe about the spring transfer portal window is like kids aren't like big names aren't entering the portal not because like they couldn't go somewhere and they couldn't start somewhere or they couldn't find anywhere to go. It's not because of that. Like the 5-star who wants to maybe enter the portal right now, he didn't enter the portal this spring not because he couldn't find somewhere to go, but I think people also have to understand like right now cash really isn't probably flowing the same way that it was in the wintertime when everybody knows what the transfer portal is going to look like at that point in time. Like there's probably some donor fatigue. I mean, these things happen. Like people are kind of strapped for cash because they already have their rosters pinned up to where they want it to be at least, or kind of what they're hoping it to look like. And so they don't really have a whole lot of extra funds. Like teams aren't really preparing for the spring window like they need a whole bunch of extra funds because they need to spend money. Ohio State wasn't doing this for the spring portal like they were in the wintertime. They weren't expecting to get a Caleb Downs or a Will Howard or anything like that during this spring transfer portal window. So I think that was probably part of the reason why. And I think that's probably something maybe to consider for what maybe happened with Christian Miller. Is like, if you do want to bag chase, sure, go into the portal, but you may not be getting this figure that you think you're going to get, or who knows, there's just no telling what happened there. But I think you do have to consider like funds right now compared to what they are in the wintertime. It's not the same in my opinion.
No, it's not. And by the time you get into the spring, you've got pretty much the entire recruiting classes on campus early at that point. So they're all there. So you're trying to figure out what your roster looks like. A lot of times you're over the scholarship limit, at that point. If that's still a number that people pay attention to, I get that that's something that isn't as, focused on because there's ways around it and things that they do. So odds are high for like programs like Georgia that you actually have people leaving, not necessarily people coming in. So when you're the player, right, and in the SEC, there's a rule that if you leave Georgia, you can't go to another SEC school. So where else are you going to go? Are you going to be able
Well,
to
you
go
can.
to an
You just have
Ohio
to sit a
State?
year, but
But yeah, but you're not. People aren't going to want to do that. That kind of defeats some of the purpose of transferring in the current stage of college football, where they've made it to where you can transfer as many times as you want, and play right away. But the only caveat to that is in the SEC, you do have to sit if you try to transfer in the spring window. So if you're looking to go somewhere and play next year, you're looking outside of your conference, right? So think about Christian Miller. If he was going to leave, he would have to go to an Ohio State, or an ACC team, or something like that, other than an SEC team. And what you just said a second ago, we already know what Ohio State paid everybody, and all that to get their roster where it is right now. They are strapped for cash, as so is so many other teams at this point. I know I like to listen to Josh Pate, and he was talking about leading up to the portal window, saying it's going to be a crazy window. It's going to be a crazy window. It really wasn't. And I think that that's one of those
No.
things that, like, people may have thought there's going to be a lot of movement, but in reality, there is donor fatigue. There is all this stuff where they don't really want to put their money up on these players during that time period. And there's teams that are trying to figure out the people they currently have and don't know if they even have room for somebody right now. So it's I was surprised that there weren't a couple more movements maybe overall in college football in this window, but I wasn't surprised that it wasn't like a insane, there weren't any big names going places in the spring window.
Yeah, I mean, I really wasn't a whole lot surprised. I'd never really expect big things from the spring transfer portal window, just because of all the points I've already made. And then also, like, I think the biggest name that would have been is Caden Proctor. But everybody knew Caden Proctor was transferring back to Alabama
2 months
ago.
ago.
Like
Yeah.
2 months ago, 3 months ago, whenever. So like that,
Yeah.
while it was spring transfer portal window happenings, it wasn't news this time. So it wasn't even like big time news that hit the timeline of like, oh my gosh, did you see this? That was old news by that time. So, I mean, as for Georgia, I think you have to call it a success. You weren't looking to really add, or you added Jaden Rashada. That was probably honestly the biggest name in the entire transfer portal window. That was the biggest addition made by anybody. Georgia filled a need. They wanted 4 scholarship quarterbacks, and they got one, and one with college experience already from Arizona State. Probably going to slide in at the 3rd spot on the depth chart. Doesn't affect Gunnar Stockton's expectancy to start in 2025 or his likelihood of winning the job next year. I think they still have a lot of belief in Gunnar Stockton, but just want to have 4 bodies in the room. So I think Georgia, you didn't lose any big names. Like Tyler Williams and Andrew Paul are the 2 biggest names. Tyler Williams going to Minnesota, but Tyler Williams had 1 reception last year for 4 yards. Not really missing out on a whole lot there. So I think for Georgia, from a Georgia perspective, you have to count it up as nothing but a win.
Yeah, it was a big win for you. There weren't any big holes in your roster as far as needing to go out and get anybody other than spot that they wanted to try to fill in this spring window. And everything else is, we already did what we were going to do in the first transfer portal window in December. We already got our recruits that we came in, so we want to see how everything plays out there. So as far as Georgia fans go, you didn't lose any really big names. I do think that if you had lost Christian Miller, that wouldn't have been great for you overall, just for depth of that position group. Not that he's going to stride away or anything like that this year, even at Georgia, but having him on the roster keeps that body there. It keeps you the opportunity to get on the field and everything as well. So I'm excited that he's stuck around. Everything in college football right now is so crazy. Everything coming up now, like you guys were talking about it last night with the NCAA coming out basically saying there's going to be profit sharing and they're trying to figure out the logistics of it. They don't have all the logistics of it right now, but they were talking about, basically they're going to do it. Like it's happening. And so I heard you guys talk about it last night. One thing that I wanted to kind of like propose as like a question is, if they're going to do profit sharing, is that going to put more regulations and regulate the NIL stuff, the collective stuff that's going on? And I think the answer to that is they're really not going to. And if the answer to that is they're not going to, what real benefit is there that they're going to sit here and do profit sharing and the schools are going to share some of their TV revenue and stuff like that? They're still going to have those donors write those checks and do everything, because they're still going to be competing for people on that aspect if they don't put more regulations on the NIL side to go coincide with the profit sharing.
Well, that was one of the questions that I proposed to Christian I'm interested to see how much this changes, like if these collectives still exist, or like how this is going to impact, donations being put into the program. I mentioned donor fatigue, and the whole reason why I kind of thought that maybe this would still help with that is because say that I'm donating money to the University of Georgia right now, say that I'm worth $1 billion for whatever reason, and I just have effort money that I can throw all willy-nilly all over the place, and I can pay up Georgia's roster however much I want. We'll say that I've been giving the University of Georgia, this is just a fake number. Don't think that I'm taking real analytics or anything from this. I'm just building a fake scenario, guys. Say I'm paying Georgia $50,000 a month for their roster every single month. And we'll say I've been doing that for the last 2 years now. So for the last 24 months plus 5 or whatever you want to call it, so like 29 months, I've been paying Georgia $50,000 a month for their roster, for their NIL, whatever. You don't think that I would probably maybe want to hinder that if I knew that the University of Georgia was now raking in money from TV revenue sharing and they're giving it to every single SEC program, and I know that dollar amount because it's public knowledge of like what these conferences rake in and how this is going to be dispersed amongst every single conference. If I know Georgia's getting, again, we'll say a fake number, $100 million from this TV contract, and they now get to use that for their program, well, why do I need to donate you $50K a month anymore? Why should I be emptying out my pockets for you? Now, I mean, donors are going to continue to donate. They want to continue to see the program flourish. Those things are still going to happen. But I don't know if you're going to see, like, again, like Ohio State or Tennessee or even what Texas A&M did, where they're going to travel 150 miles per hour for the next 6 months. They're going to rack up every single recruit that they can. And then when push comes to shove and I got to pay these kids, I no longer have the money. Like, I don't think you're going to see as much of that anymore. I think it builds consistency. I think it levels the playing field more than anything a little bit more. And I think it just brings some more, openness to this whole NIL deal of like, if we know it's coming from this, if we know it's coming from TV revenue sharing, then like we know we can connect the dots. You get what I'm saying? Like we know exactly what Georgia can use. We know the facilities or the funds that they have access to, those sorts of things. So I think it just provides openness and honesty.
So first I want to say shouts out to my niece that's in the comments right now. Appreciate you watching. So I wanted to say something to you real quick. But as far as what you're talking about, I struggle to find where that's actually going to make much of a difference as far as the donor side of it, because when I think about it is these TV contracts are being paid anyways. So unless these TV contracts are going to be higher because the revenue split's coming from it, then it doesn't really change the money that's coming into UGA right now. The only thing that's changing is they're getting that revenue money and they now have to give some of it to the players, which means they don't have as much of it to work with as they normally do because they're giving some of it away. So it almost makes me wonder, like, if these TV contracts if they don't change, then now you're giving this money to the players. The school has less money. The program has less money as is. I almost wonder if it gets worse for these donors because now they're giving that money to them and that's a guarantee. They're getting it for sure, but these players are still going to have their competitive market value when it comes to recruiting. I don't see how it really changes the aspect of the NIL side that we are in right now. I don't quite grasp it, and I'm not saying I'm right. I'm just saying as far as my perspective of it, of what I look at, the TV contract for SEC is set for X number of years already. So if they come around in the next 2 years and they make it to where they have to give some of that to the players, it won't be able to be recouped from the TV contract until they renegotiate with ESPN right now, which is the SEC. So then it's still going to, I don't know if it helps. I really don't. Unless they put regulations in place saying, because we're doing that, now these collectives can't necessarily do what they're currently doing. And maybe NIL goes back to what it's supposed to be in the first place was hey, JT Daniels has an endorsement deal with Zaxby's. That's what it was supposed to be in the first place, but it's gotten away from that. And I don't know how this necessarily changes that, because the money coming out of your TV contract, I don't know if it changes the transfer quarterback that wants to come to your school that's also in the SEC that's going to make the same money at Alabama as they do if they come to Georgia. As far as TV contract goes, they're still going to want their NIL money to kind of guarantee their spot.
Yeah, but I think it probably will kind of limit some of these bidding wars, because the thing that's getting everybody is, again, it's like you have 10 programs up here who can spend $20 million on a roster right now. And then you have a conglomeration of another programs who can spend a little bit less than them right here. And then you have, just a pyramid. And then you have bottom feeders where it's like, we can't even compete to a quarter of what these top teams can spend. Whereas now, like Vanderbilt, for example, Vanderbilt cannot compete with Tennessee, can't even compete with Georgia, probably can't even compete with some of these other mid-tier SEC schools. But now that you're putting them in this group where the SEC as a whole is getting revenue shares, that's where it kind of levels things out a little bit. And I don't think you get this tiered level of play with the NIL. I mean, obviously it's still going to happen. Cheating has been around. Paying players has been around for a long time in college football. And it just kind of sort of over the last 10, 15 years became more common knowledge to fans than it was 50 years ago or whatnot. But it was happening 50 years ago too, So like, it's never going to go away. Like paying players to come to your school is never going to go away. Donors donating money or whatever, having a handler to go get your cash or dropping a bag on a player, that is never going to go away, especially because the NCAA is going to disperse at the end of this. So like that's never going to go away, but I think you can at least hinder it a little bit. And I think you can make it a little more collective and a little more uniform.
Yeah, I get that you're trying to make it like more uniform for those teams like it's talk. So they now have a set dollar amount that they give these players, right? I think that can help on that aspect of it overall because now, they've got that guarantee to come there and then they can still make some more off their NIL stuff. I'm still a little hesitant to say that like, I don't think it fixes college football. I know everybody's been pushing for revenues shares for a long time. I just don't think it fixes college football because I think you're still going to, maybe the scale is different. I'm not going to argue with you on that. Maybe the scale of what these transfer players make will be different, but you will still have hey, Georgia's going to pay me, $500,000 to come play there. What are you going to pay me on the top side as well? Are you going to pay me 550? You're going to pay me 600? What's the number that you're going to give me? I think you're still going to get some of those. Maybe the number's different than what it currently is. I think that could be true. But I do still think that in order for it to actually be successful, the whole point that anyone has ever made as far as putting in a revenue share is that we have consistency across college football. Well, the only way that actually works is if you put regulations in place that say, hey, because we're doing revenue share, these are employees of the school. They are, not amateur athletes anymore. They are professional athletes. They're making money. They can still make money off their name, but it should be based on the way it was supposed to be in the first place, where you go get an endorsement deal from a company, not a collective that is being donated to that then turns around and pays you. Because at the end of the day, we can sit there and say that's NIL all we want, but that's still pay for play. They're doing it that way. So unless they put a regulation on that part and kind of cap off how much the collective is allowed to give, then I think we're still having some of the same problems. But maybe the dollar amounts are less because now every player is making 50 grand a year anyways. That part I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't sit here and say that it's going to fix college football either, just because I think there's still a lot of uncertainty around it. I think that with the direction that things are going, I think that like if it does end up being a super league where it is the SEC versus the Big Ten, and then eventually I think because these student athletes are going to basically be employees and you are going to get a players union of some sort, and you're going to have all those things start coming together. And then like kind of once the dust settles, I think that's when you'll kind of be like, just like NIL, like once we were a year or two into this, we were like, okay, probably not the best format. This is not working the way that we wanted it to. There are clear issues with this. Now we need to make a different step in a different direction. And so then so I think it's obviously going to take time for us to evaluate this, but I think more than anything, this is what I think college fans should take away from this is TV revenue sharing. This isn't just about your favorite football team. This isn't just about the Georgia Bulldogs playing in Sanford Stadium, or it isn't about the Tennessee Volunteers playing in Neyland Stadium. Like this is because of the baseball team. This is because of the women's basketball team. Like it helps everybody. And, there were some questions and there was some concerns of like, well, what happens to the women's basketball team if X happens? Or, what happens to the baseball team if they have to fund themselves? Like it's just not possible. So now that you're getting these TV revenue shares and these athletes can be supported and whatnot, like it's really going to help that out as well. So that brings a lot of comfort to my mind, knowing that this is also going to help other athletic programs.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest reason that they can't let the Big Ten and SEC make a super conference is because if they do, not a super conference, but a super league, at that point, then it becomes pulling the schools away from the university itself, and that will kill every women's sport. It'll kill baseball, maybe not basketball in a lot of spots because basketball is looked at as a revenue producing sport for a lot of for a lot of schools. Maybe not at Georgia right now, but maybe in the future. But like with even your baseball program, right? If that money from that football program funds everything, you got Title IX and everything that funds women's sports because of the money being split through the university from football because that's where your main revenue producer is. So It'll be interesting to see if that ever were to come to fruition, but I know they came out not long ago, maybe a couple weeks ago, and they were basically saying that they didn't really want a super league. I think it was Greg Sankey, and he was saying, we want it to be what it is, and connected to the universities and everything like that. So we'll see how that part plays out. Um, I'm curious to see where that money goes to other programs inside the schools, right? So we're talking about revenue splits, and we're trying to make these athletes make money from football and stuff like that. But that obviously translates down to your women's basketball team, to your volleyball team, to everything, your equestrian team at UGA. It'll be interesting to see what that money looks like, right? So how do they determine that a football player can get $50,000 a year versus what does the equestrian, player or rider, I guess, get, because it's horseback riding. What do they
Mhm.
get in that aspect of it? Because you can't make a decision in the NCAA for athletes based solely on football without thinking about what it's going to translate to those other sports. How do they make that, because how's it to say that it's fair? Because the whole point of revenue sharing is that you're putting a value on these players essentially, and every player on your roster is going to make the same thing. How are they going to do that with like other sports programs inside the university?
Beats me, brother. I don't know. It's kind of just wait and seeing. I think that again, like once it kind of gets rolling, obviously we'll have more details then. For now, though, I mean, other than knowing like what revenue sharing is and how that's going to happen and where the money's coming from, like it's hard to like pinpoint and put your finger on it of where like actually following a trail of money and knowing exactly how all of this is going to work. Just like NIL, like we had no idea how exactly that was going to work until the floodgates were open. It was like, oh,
Yeah.
well, it's not exactly what I thought NIL was going to be, but like that's just what things are. So I mean, we'll know here. I would say probably a couple months is what I would say.
Yeah, we'll see how it all plays out on that aspect of it. But I'm with Dan. The NIL, revenue sharing, all that kind of conversation does dominate everything in college football right now because it's
Sure,
so relevant, and that's what the sport is. I wish we could sit here and talk about football
it's a
a
big
lot
issue.
more than we have to, but this is the direction of college football and the sport as a whole. So we got to talk about it because it's going to impact what the product looks like down the road when it all is said and done. But I'm with you, so we will switch this conversation over to the draft as well. Georgia had another pretty good year. Two players drafted in the first round, correct?
Amarius Mims and Brock Bowers.
And Brock Bowers, and there were 8 or 9 overall.
Hey,
8. Okay. So let's talk about the draft real quick. Obviously, like we just said, we got Brock Bowers and Amarius Mims going in the first round. Lab McConkey was just there at the tail end, but like the front end of the second round right there, being picked number 34, I believe.
mhm.
How did you walk away from the draft thinking it played out for Georgia players overall?
I mean, honestly, it kind of played out the way I expected it to. Brock Bowers went kind of in the slot that maybe not to the team that I expected him to go to, but he ended up being taken in the slot that he was projected to go in. Cincinnati Bengals taking Amarius Mims. If you were following the pre-draft scenarios, like that was kind of a shoe-in. It felt like that one was probably going to happen, and it ended up happening. So the first round players went where they wanted to, or went where they were projected to go. I always said Lad McConkey was going to be one of the first players off the board in the second round, and that's what he was. Javon Bullard being a second round pick is kind of where everybody thought he would end up. Tyke Smith being in the third round. I think Cedric Van Pran being taken in the fifth round kind of surprised people a little bit. I think it caught some people off guard, or it may have been in the sixth round. I can't remember exactly. I think it was the fifth round though. But arm length, center's not really
It was
that
the
big of
fifth.
a.
It was in the
It's
fifth
not
round.
that fifth round. Okay, I was right. Isn't that big of a need, or center isn't like as big of a need either in the NFL draft too. So it all just kind of depends on who needs one, where they want to take him, and whatnot. But I think him ending up in Buffalo is an ideal situation. The only big surprise was honestly I was surprised to see Zion Lowe go in the sixth round to the Atlanta Falcons. But it also makes sense because the Atlanta Falcons were linked to Zion Logue in the pre-draft process. They had met him, and reportedly they liked him a lot. They liked his size, they liked his length, and they thought that he honestly still had some room to grow. I think they thought that he still had some areas that he could develop into and maybe get even better than he was at Georgia. And then also the biggest surprise to me, I think, was Marcus Rosemi-Jacksaint not going drafted. I thought the buzz around him leading up into the draft, that all pointed to him like, okay, that dude's probably going to be anywhere from a 5th to 7th round pick. Someone's going to bet on the traits. Someone's going to bet on the consistency of that guy. And no one did. So I was a little bit shocked by that. But outside of that, I think it really just kind of went the way I expected it to.
Yeah, it really did go overall pretty consistent with the approach that we thought was going to happen, right? Like it played out similar to what most people saw Georgia players going into. Just real quick, I'll read it off to everybody. First round was Brock Bowers and Amarius Mims at 13th and 18th overall. Then you had Lad McConkey going 34th overall to the Chargers. Kamari Lassiter to Houston with 42nd
I forgot
overall.
Kamari.
Javon Bullard, Green Bay. Yeah, you did forget him. I got you. Don't worry. Javon Bullard, 58th overall to Green Bay. Third round was Tyke Smith to Tampa at 89th overall. Cedric Van Pran, Buffalo Bills, 141st overall. Sixth round was Zion Logue to Atlanta. Undrafted guys that you saw was Kendall Milton, Dejon Edwards, and Marcus Rosemy, Jack Saint, and Tramel Walthour. So the biggest surprise to me was seeing that Zion Logue went to the Atlanta Falcons, because I know we talked about this prior. We kind of thought he would go undrafted in general, possibly that somebody wouldn't necessarily take the shot. And especially seeing him go to the Atlanta Falcons, everybody talks about the fact that the Falcons don't draft any Georgia players, but they take him in the sixth. Kind of feels like what happened a couple years ago with, was it a guard? What was his name?
Justin Schaefer.
Justin Schaefer. Kind of feels like that similar spot, but I think that Zion Logue has a much better chance of actually making the roster with Atlanta in this situation as well, with what their defense looks like. But I was surprised to see that both Kendall and Dejon Edwards went undrafted. I kind of thought one of those guys would find a home in the draft, but going back to what you guys talked about on your show with Brooks, it's not necessarily a bad thing versus going as a seventh round draft pick to potentially being an undrafted free agent, because you got a little bit more control of what organization you sign with. If you get phone calls from three different teams as soon as that draft is over saying, "Hey, we want to sign you," you get to pick which one you want to go to and which one's a better fit for you. So I feel like Kendall going to Philly and Dejon going to Pittsburgh is a team that they wanted to be with in that aspect of it. Now, Philly has a bunch of Georgia players, obviously. Do they still have Swift?
No, they don't. He's with the
his
Bears.
contract? Okay, so that's right. His contract just came up afterwards, and so he's a free agent and went somewhere else. That's right. So they did have a gap. They have some spot for him to be able to make a run at that lineup, and then making a couple plays here and there. I think Kendall and Dejon both can last in the NFL, even though they were undrafted. I think they have a chance of making the roster and sticking around for a little while.
Yeah, I thought that one of them would get drafted. It's tough. I think Dejon just really wasn't ever going to test well, and he didn't end up testing for a reason. And he doesn't exactly have these NFL measurables that you're probably wanting to bet on in the NFL draft. But if anything, Georgia fans know that he's consistent and he's good for 3-4 yards every single play, no matter what. So, you got to like his odds there. I think that him going to Pittsburgh, that's another place that drafts quite a few Georgia players. Broderick Jones, Darnell Washington, George Pickens, they have a history of doing this. So I like the destination for him there as well. Kendall Milton, his salary got leaked out. I shouldn't say leaked out. It's not like it's insider information.
It was released.
Or whatnot.
We'll say it was released.
Yeah, it was released. Yeah. He got $250K of salary guarantees as an undrafted free agent. Now, the final pick of the NFL draft gets $1 million per year, a $4 million contract, but undrafted free agent getting $250K in salary guarantees, like, that's good stuff right there. Then also, too, like I saw this today, that Boston Scott, I believe that's his name, was a running back for the Philadelphia Eagles. He is going elsewhere. He found a new home. So that kind of opens up another one of those spots for Kendall Milton. Like, we know the deal in Philadelphia. Like, we're not saying Kendall Milton's going to go out there and he's going to earn the starting spot, because we know that they have Saquon Barkley lining up over there for them. But Kendall Milton can maintain a roster spot, and Philadelphia likes Georgia players. And if I had a feeling – knowing Kendall, knowing the person that he is, knowing the way that he handled business throughout his entire career at Georgia, through all the injuries and everything, like, dude's a grinder. He's going to figure it out. And I think the Philadelphia Eagles are going to love having and appreciate having him.
Yeah, he's the type of guy that's definitely going to get there and earn a roster spot. And like you said, he's not going to go start, obviously, because they have Saquon Barkley, and like what Dan Kiley is talking about in the comments as well. So he's not going to be your starter, obviously, but you don't do an undrafted free agent as your starter in the first place. That's not what his role is going to be. His goal going in is to go in there and earn a roster spot and become that, third back or whatever it's going to be on that depth chart, and try to just earn some snaps here and there, and then show them that he can do it. And so maybe down the road, he either, can earn a spot in a few years as a starter, or he goes somewhere else and he now has some tape put on, and other teams get to see what he can do in the NFL, and maybe he can make that run somewhere else. But he's the type of guy that just he's got his head down and he will grind. He's not going to get in trouble or do anything crazy. He's going to sit there and he's there to work. That's what his mentality is. So I'm excited to see how it plays out for all of these guys. What would you say is the best fit from this draft class, right? Like a place that these players went that you think they have the best opportunity. I know you guys kind of talked about this on y'all shows the other day, but kind of want to bring that conversation back up. The best fit for you. I know, there's Brock Bowers in Vegas. It's going to be good because he's going to be a different type of style of tight end that they have there. Lad McConkey at the Chargers is obviously going to be having a big role because they don't have Keenan Allen anymore. And so they've got an opening for a big playmaker there as well.
Yeah, I mean, I like Brock Bowers being with the Raiders, but questions at quarterback, like Aiden O'Connell as your quarterback or Gardner Minshew, like either one of those, not really great options. But I think that Brock Bowers is going to do well in Oakland because of who Brock Bowers is. But I have two guys. I think two guys ended up at some really ideal positions that I really like personally. The first one being Amarius Mims. I think that Cincinnati is a great landing spot for him because the Bengals need offensive line. They need help up there. They need help protecting Joe Burrow. And obviously Amarius Mims provides that service for you in a very elite manner. And I also like the idea of Orlando Brown playing left tackle, and then you can put Amarius Mims at right tackle. I know they have Trent Brown playing right tackle as well, or that's who's been playing right tackle for them over the past couple of seasons. But I like the idea of Orlando Brown, a freak of nature, and then Amarius Mims, a freak of nature on the other side. I like those. I like that plug and play right there. So I think that's a really good situation for him. And then also Javon Bullard getting drafted by the Green Bay Packers. And I say it because of this. The Packers drafted 3 safeties in this draft class. And that probably screams out to people like, why the heck is that a good fit then, J-Will? Like, why would you say that's a good one? Clearly, they're just beefing up the roster. Like, maybe they're just going to use Bullard as an extra piece. Well, I would say that because the other 2 are strong safeties. They already have Jair Alexander. So I'm thinking that they want Javon Bullard to play nickel, which is where I want him to play. I think that's where he's designed to play, and I think that's where he plays best. So if that's what the Green Bay Packers want to do, I think that's a tremendous fit for Bullard. But even if you don't play him at nickel, then your next best scenario is, Jair Alexander and Javon Bullard together in the back end of the secondary. They get to play together, and they get to wreak havoc in the secondary. Like, I think that's a really good fit for them. And also, Georgia players have had great success with the Packers. Eric Stokes, outside of some injuries, he's played really well when he's available. Quay Walker has looked really good. And Devontae Wyatt looked really good last season for the Packers as well. So they've had great success with their Georgia players. I think Javon Bullard is going to play really well.
So I agree with you on that as well. I think Javon Bullard, no matter where he went, was going to be almost an automatic fit just because he's that type of player. Whoever drafted him was going to want to put him in that type of nickel corner position. That's what he did so well at Georgia before he pushed back to safety, just to kind of make room for Tyke Smith, because you had to have both of them on the field, and that was the best way to do it at the time. One fit that actually, I'm going to go with one of the undrafted free agents as far as a really good fit overall, is Rojak. Not because I think it's a great team, they got a great quarterback, obviously, or anything like that, but because of their wide receiver depth chart. Like, they took Luke McCaffrey as well in this draft, who's going to be doing well, but they pretty much just have Terry McLaurin. That's like their one guy, right? And then they have Jahan Dotson and a couple of little guys there. And it's not like there's a huge depth chart in front of him. He's got a chance to, one, make the roster and then make his way onto the field pretty early in his career there. And he's the type of guy that's going to work his butt off. And like you said, going into the draft, he had a lot of momentum and hype coming around him. Like we thought he was going to get drafted because he had so much attention on him. But in reality, he ended up going undrafted. I do think that he's still got a very good opportunity there to make the roster and then potentially get on the field pretty early in his career.
Yeah, I think that's a good landing spot for him going up to the Commanders. But, I remember this was way back when. I think this was probably like maybe right when the season ended, and we were talking to Terrence Edwards on our show, and Terrence was like, Rojak is going to last in the league, not because of his great hands, not because of his great athletic ability or anything like that, but the dude's going to last on special teams. Like, if that's what he has to do to be a 8-year vet in the NFL, like, he will play special teams every single Sunday for you. He'll do it tremendously, and he'll do his job every single time. Rojak's just one of those guys that just finds a way for him to stick around. He has a lot of confidence in himself. He believes in himself, and he's not above doing any of the dirty work. And so that for those reasons, Rojak is going to last in the NFL. He's going to remain on rosters, whether that's with Washington for his entire career or he kind of bounces around. I don't know, but he's going to last in the NFL, and he's going to be a name that just kind of continues to be out there, continues to find his way on a roster, and he might end up being one of these reliable wide receiver 3s, wide receiver 4s every now and then. And, for the biggest thing as a wide receiver 4 in the NFL, you may not get a whole lot of playing time, but the one thing you need to be able to do is catch the ball when it's thrown towards you. And that's exactly what Rojak does. So whether he gets 2 targets a game, if he catches both balls like he usually does, it ain't going to matter. He'll continue to find himself a spot. And so I think he's going to do well with Washington. And I think he's going to have a good lengthy NFL career.
Yeah, and he has the ability to just get out there and make that big play when you need it, right? Like you said, he might not catch 7 balls in a game, but he'll catch 2, and they're going to be in big spots, right? Like he's gonna come in clutch for your team, and he's gonna make that play, right? Like he's gonna make the extra thing happen there and be a sure-handed. So I'm excited to see what all of these guys do in the NFL. It was, I would say, theoretically a down year in the draft for Georgia compared to the last 2 years. But as y'all talked about as well on your show, that next year looks like it's going to be crazy. I think if you look at this year's lineup and this year's roster, there weren't as many draft eligible players. We'll say it that way, right? As there were a couple years ago when Georgia set the draft record at 15 and had so many first rounders go. There's a lot of opportunity next year because these young guys are getting to that spot where they're actually draft eligible moving forward.
Yep.
So I think it's just that 1 year in between, and maybe that kind of plays out to why Georgia wasn't quite as sharp this year as they had been the past 2 years. They didn't quite have that depth, that age experience kind of thing, and those guys that are going to be draft eligible. But that's not going to be a problem moving forward for Georgia. Obviously, they've got a lot of big names that are going to go in that draft next year, with Carson Beck being, potentially a number 1 overall, or at least a top 5 pick potentially there, depending on team needs. So it's going to be fun to see how this next year's team plays out. Before we go off tonight, real quick, let's just talk about what Georgia's team looks like next year, and as far as what are the expectations for Georgia. Obviously, I feel like it's safe to say that it's playoff or bust with a 12-team playoff situation coming up, because if you're not in the top 12 and you're Georgia, at that point, that is a huge failure. But what should the expectations be next year? Talking about how many players, I know you and Christian were talking last night about how Georgia was going to potentially break the draft record next year and go for 17 or 18 guys. Christian's got a hot take on that one. I don't think he's extremely wrong with it. But with that being said, if that is the roster that you have, you're going into this season, right, with a 12-team playoff situation, should the expectations be you should be in a national championship game next year, or it's kind of a disappointing season for Georgia? Not saying they have to win it, but should they be there?
First off, I don't even know if I would classify Christian's take as a hot take. Go look at the roster right now, because
I say hot take in the sense that you got to break the record kind of thing. It's a
you got to get more than 15.
Let's call it a little spicy. That's what we'll call it. A little
simmering. It's a simmering take. We'll call it that. But this year's roster is without a doubt loaded. High expectations on both sides of the football. I think the biggest one obviously is Carson Beck, just kind of seeing what he's going to do as a second-year starter. I don't know if I want to put expectations record-wise, because still so far out from this year, and I don't want to just go ahead and jump to conclusions now in May. We'll have plenty of time to talk about that through the offseason, but I think the expectations at the bare minimum is to make the playoff. There's never been a point in time outside of his first year at the University of Georgia where Georgia has not been a top 12 team under Kirby Smart, or finished the year as a top 12 team. So it should always be to make the playoff. And I mean, it should be to win the SEC. I think Georgia is the best overall team in the SEC. So that automatically puts you in the top 5, puts you in the top 4, and that gets you a first round bye. So you at least make it to the second round of the playoffs. So at that point, you got to win 3 more games to win yourself a national title. So those 3 games, you don't know what the opponents look like, but I think at the bare minimum, you should be one of the Final 4 teams. I think that should be the ultimate goal for Georgia, or that should kind of be set the bar for Georgia. Is you should be one of the Final 4 teams, because you are one of the best 4 teams in college football. You're probably one of the best 2 football teams in college football. I think it's Georgia and Ohio State, and I think it's kind of close, but I give Georgia the edge because I think they have the better quarterback in this league and college football right now. If you look at the history of these college football playoff matchups and these teams that win national titles, the edge of the quarterback position is a huge ordeal. And I think Carson Beck over Will Howard, I think most people would agree with that every single day, twice on Sunday. So I think it's make the Final Four, make a push at a national title. If you don't win it, is it a little disappointing? Sure. That's just kind of what happens when you win back-to-back national titles. But it's not like, dang, we just wasted a season. You make the Final Four. I think you did a good job.
Yeah, I kind of had the same concept in my mind where I feel like you need to be a Final Four team. I don't think you have to win a national title next year to be considered, a good year. I know that Georgia has 2 national titles in the last 3 years, so it kind of feels like that's like an expectation every year going forward, especially with the roster that you're going to have next year. But I do think it's fair to say at least a Final Four team. Playoffs is a must, obviously, as well. I think it's safe to say that you should, as far as feeling like it's a good year or not, for Georgia, you should go win the SEC. I think you should do that. You've got Texas that you have to compete with. You have Ole Miss that's going to be at the top, and maybe you can mix Missouri in there. But between those 3 to 4 teams, including Georgia, Georgia's definitely got the best roster. They've got like a very experienced quarterback. I know Texas has a very experienced quarterback as well, but I think that should be an expectation. I would be a little frustrated if Georgia doesn't win the SEC next year. I mean, Kirby Smart has been here for a while. He's won 2 national titles, but he's only won 2 SEC championships in his time at Georgia. So that's one of those things that is harder. Like, it's easier said than done. It's a hard thing to do, to go out there and win it, because we've always had Bama and Nick Saban in there. We've had LSU come through, with Joe Burrow years and stuff like that as well. There's been some down years for Georgia as well through the whole process. So I think winning the SEC is where step 1 goes, and then maybe a Final Four appearance should be your expectations. As far as regular season record, I know Dan threw in there, 11-1. I think that's a reasonable expectation. To say that Georgia goes undefeated next year, I feel like is an unfair expectation for Georgia because of the schedule they have. They have one of the toughest schedules in college football, with most of their big games being on the road. So it's not going to be easy to go 12-0. Going 11-1 would be a fantastic regular season for Georgia. And at that point, that should put you in an SEC championship game, give you the opportunity to get that first round bye by winning it, and put yourself in a great spot to get to that Final Four. I'd love to talk for a second about what you were talking about with the quarterback situations as far as Georgia and Ohio State. If you remember last year, one of the big talking points about Georgia, one of the negatives was they got a quarterback that's Carson Beck. Yeah, sure, he's a highly recruited guy. He's supposed to be good. He's unproven. That's why Michigan and other teams were picked over Georgia by a lot of the analysts on ESPN and stuff like that, was because they didn't have that experienced quarterback. Well, guess what? Now you have Carson Beck in, is it his 4th year at Georgia or 5th year at Georgia?
He's been here since 2020. So, yeah.
So 5th year. This is his 5th year at Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
So 5 years out of school, 2nd year starting, you have a proven quarterback. You have a guy that's there, knows what he's doing. He threw for just under 4,000 yards last year. He's a great quarterback. He is going to be that difference maker for you. So when you're looking at teams like Ohio State and other teams like that could compete for a national title, you've got to put Georgia right there. And you cannot say it's because they don't have an experienced quarterback this year. That was everybody's excuse last year. It wasn't Georgia's problem last year. They had other issues across the entire depth chart where it wasn't quite as good as it had been in past years. And Carson Beck actually did, have pretty much a 4,000-yard season. So you couldn't ask for a lot more from your quarterback in that spot. But next year, you've got the depth around him. You've got him, and other teams, like you were talking about with Ohio State, don't have that serious experience at quarterback and stuff like that. Georgia's set for a really good run this year. I'm excited to see how it plays out.
Yeah, absolutely. No doubt about it. Going to be another exciting season, and just interesting to see how this new format of a college football season unfolds.
Yeah, the new college football format is going to be extremely interesting because now we've got 12 teams. The SEC does not have divisions anymore. So now it's a, winning percentage in the conference thing. So it's not an East and West team anymore, which I think they should have done a while ago. That's something that college football has been moving towards. So I think that actually is really good for the sport. I think it's good for Georgia overall. Like you don't have to worry about playing the same teams every year. You get a different schedule. You've got a hard schedule coming up, but it'll be interesting to see the college football landscape moving forward with this format that they have both in the SEC and college football as a whole. If Georgia ever misses the top 12 with Kirby Smart, I will absolutely be shocked. I think that means you're pretty much in the playoffs every year moving forward because, like you said, only 1 year have they not finished in the top 12, and that was his first year at Georgia. So I'm excited about it. I don't know if you have anything else for us, but I think that's all I got today.
No, man, I'm good. I think you hit the nail on the head right there. I think that's a good way to close it out. So I'll go ahead and do this for you guys. Right there at the bottom banner, like, subscribe, share with your family. If you're listening to us over on the podcast platform, make sure to leave us a 5-star review. Leave us a little comment. Tell us why you enjoy the podcast or maybe why you don't like the podcast. Some constructive criticism, if you will. Social media handles are right there if you want to keep up to date with us, see some of the great content that we're posting over there. Keep in touch with us, or if we'll give you a follow back and we can see what you're sharing on your timeline. So do all that good stuff for us. We appreciate you guys for tuning in. I know we didn't really do a good job of publicizing and let everybody know that we're going live tonight. So appreciate everybody for tuning in. Stoddard, you can close us out.
Yeah, even without the announcement or anything, we actually had a decent number of live viewers throughout the entire time of our show based on what we've had in the past. So I'm excited about that as well. But as always, keep it classy in the Classic City. We will see you next week.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Classic City Sports. Take a second to subscribe, rate, review, and share with your friends and family. Feel free to reach out to the Classic City Sports crew on Twitter with any topics you'd like discussed. You can reach out to Jeremiah at The Stodfather, to Jonathan at Dr._J Will, and make sure to follow at Classic City Pod for show updates. Check back next week for a brand new episode. In the meantime,
2 simple words which express the sentiments of the entire Bulldog Nation.